everyone for logging on tonight on this busy Tuesday night. I'm Mel Buchanan. I'm the curator of decorative arts and design at NOMA, and I'm really excited about this program. But before we launch into even introducing who's on the screen with me, I'm going to say a few housekeeping words. We are recording tonight, so just so everyone knows that and feels comfortable with that. And we have enabled the chat so that everyone that's online can feel part of a community and feel free to chat. But we are going to be using the Q&A feature to really direct our questions with Roberto Lugo. So if you have a question as we're chatting tonight, please know that we have set aside plenty of time at the end to address the questions through the Q&A function. Okay, so I'm so excited to be here tonight for this special program. I'm joined by another NOMA team member, Nick Aziz. Nick's our community engagement curator, also a New Orleans-based artist with a wide-ranging community practice. And I know, Nick, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you are as giddy as I am to be here tonight. To be here tonight with Roberto Lugo. So Roberto Lugo is an American artist, spoken word poet, an educator, and probably one of the most prominent ceramicists working right now. So Roberto, we are so excited to be talking with you tonight. Hi.
Man, I'm so happy to be here too. And listen, I was at the American Academy earlier this year, American Academy in Rome, and three of the people were from New Orleans, and all my New Orleans people they're the most fun people to be around. Even Italy, y'all representing. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do something with New Orleans, of course. Anything with them, I'm down.
Well, maybe let's use that as a great transition to talk about the work you did do with New Orleans. So as a way, we're going to keep the introduction going, but we'd love to look at artwork. So Connor, do you mind bringing up on the screen the first slide? Thanks. So just to set the tone for everyone at home, this is a commissioned artwork that Roberto Lugo did with NOMA 2019. It's now on view at NOMA's galleries. It'll be up in a special exhibition until April 18th, which is why we're having this wonderful program, but it's not going away. And that's an important thing to keep in mind with this piece. We intend it to stay on view in the permanent collection. And I think that'll become evident as we keep talking about it. So Roberto, do you want to tell us a little bit about the stunting garniture set?
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things that I was thinking of when I made this connection with the New Orleans Museum of Art was, I think a lot of times when we see work in museums, we don't necessarily see perspectives, not only the artwork that's represented, but the artists, but also the perspective of people of color. I'm talking about Black and brown communities. And, that also is part of the reason why, some of us don't feel welcome in a museum context. There's nothing really there to acknowledge our existence. And so I was thinking about New Orleans and something that I wanted to make for that special place. And, the first image that comes to my mind is I start thinking about No Limit Soldiers, and I start thinking about Lil Wayne. And, I wanted to use that instinct, that tells me this is something, because it kind of feels like there's a lot of, people out there are better suited to understand New Orleans history and traditions, that will represent that in your collection in art. And so I thought about, how to talk a little bit about those influences outside of New Orleans and how those things penetrate, even where I was growing up. Like the song y'all was just playing, Go DJ. Like I remember when that came out, and we was always people in the street rapping and like kind of like doing battles, and it was kind of part of our culture. But word spread, and somebody was like, oh yeah, my cousin's a rapper and he's like, he knows Lil Wayne. We were all like, oh shit, like that's amazing that, you got his two way, back then we talk about two ways. And so, that got me excited on this. And then I started thinking a little bit about this relationship between being from the hood, which is where I'm from. When I'm talking about hood, I'm talking about a neighborhood that was underprivileged in terms of just like people being poor. I mean, everybody around me was, was struggling financially. And the neighborhood that I lived in was known in Philadelphia for prostitution and for drugs. And so coming from that place, there's little things that we get in life, like a nice pair of sneakers, like a pair of Jordans or some rims, things that are sort of like attainable that we use to show off, sort of like a gaudy sort of approach, kind of reminiscent of, I think, what a lot of people would say, like the sort of aesthetic of like Master P and No Limit Soldiers, sort of that like really rich, regal aesthetic to it. And so I thought of the word stunt and how we use it in the context of where I come from. A lot of times we use the word stunting to talk about showing off. So like, if you got some really nice sneakers, the new ones, you bring them out, people ask you about them and you're showing them off, that's stunting. But then, there's also this other idea of stunting is like preventing you from growth, right? And I've also seen both sides of that. Like a lot of the men, I got like 50 some first cousins, 57, and all the men were incarcerated at one point or another. It's just sort of like part of our heritage, really. And most of us don't graduate from high school. I can think of maybe out of all those cousins, maybe three of us, the men that graduated from high school. And so I think about how working towards attaining those things like sneakers, like rims, sometimes leads to a different kind of stunting, like the stunting of like feeling like your opportunities are limited. And in many ways they are because of societally what we offer people of color and what's represented to Black and brown men as far as opportunities. And so I like to play on that word stunting. And then garniture historically is sort of this grouping of objects that would generally go on a mantle. And one of the things that's really important about talking about garniture is at the time where garniture was really widespread, porcelain was considered more expensive than gold. So porcelain was the biggest export out of China. And so you're talking about when somebody owned one of these objects originally, that was like having an entire object made out of gold. It was like uh, the most stunting that you could conceivably do, and then you put it on your mantle for everybody to come and see how wealthy you were. So I wanted to create a set of garniture, and I used these three figures, and thinking of No Limit, thinking of Lil Wayne, and thinking of Louis Armstrong. And then I started to just go from there in terms of thinking about the form and how to keep these really traditional, sort of like ornate forms that then, pay homage and represent people that normally wouldn't be represented in that context, which I think is really important. And then lastly, what I might just say about this work is one of the things that's really important to me for my work is that if somebody doesn't have any connection with ceramics or crafts, maybe somebody doesn't even have a big connection to the visual arts. They go in the museum. I'm really interested in them connecting with a piece, and them finding something that's recognizable so they feel like they're in a position of authority to know what that icon means and to describe it to somebody else in the museum who might understand what the historical significance of these ceramic objects are. And so it sort of creates this opportunity to really be really broad connecting and talk to, what I would imagine a more diverse audience.
Absolutely. Um, well, I thought you kind of touched on a few things, and I thought for the sake of our audience, I promise we will come back to stunting and this garniture set because we have some specific questions and some meaty topics to dive in just from this artwork at NOMA. But I thought we might take a chance to give a little broader picture of from for other of your artwork. And you mentioned precious porcelain and who's represented on it. And I thought, next, can you show us the next slide, please, Connor? Just to give an idea of kind of like how that might look in other works. These are some of my well, clearly I put the presentation together. So some of my favorite examples of your work because of the stories they tell, but I should let you tell the story. So can you tell us a little bit more about what we're seeing here on the screen as we move through these next 3 slides?
Yeah, so the pieces on the left, on my left, are two teapots, front to back, and it has an image of myself. And this particular teapot was shown at the Walters Museum of Art, and the place that I was installing these works at was the home of a former secessionist slave owner. And so, thinking of the same idea of garniture and it being um, uh, an enslaver, and this work being on a mantle, I really thought it was an opportunity to be able to do something uh, that would effectively like recognize uh, some of the people that are would never be recognized in this context, or so for example, one of the things that I did was I was able to get from the Baltimore college, local college, Museum of Arts college. They had some archives of enslaved people that were anonymous. They didn't have the names of them, and so I thought of like taking those images and putting them on pots, an image that like people weren't able to see, and a person who's like the only artifact that we have left of their existence was most likely this image that doesn't even recognize who they are. And so I thought about like the prominence of the placement of these objects, but then I also thought about the fact that ceramics last thousands of years, and how you can take an ephemeral object or something that like is hidden away in a flat file and do the opposite, put it in a place of prominence at a museum.
Yeah.
And so this piece has very traditional ornamentation. Like the bottom half of it is painted like Greek pottery, and the very top half is decorated like Worcester porcelain, or like a Sèvres porcelain, is sort of like royal blue and gold. And so it's sort of this what I'm trying to do with my work, and how I mentioned earlier this connection between people from one part of a community and people from another part of a community. I try to do that even in the patterning in my work, and try to represent different cultures or histories, things that I'm really looking into. But then at the same time, um, one of the things that there's some like really subtle things, like the fact that the blue and gold is sort of like running over the Greek pottery is kind of like a reference to graffiti, sort of like this dripping of oversprayed glaze. And then the piece on the right is actually a series I did of sneaker bowls. So, for me, sneakers aren't really just like a hobby. They're kind of like one of the few like iconic images I can think of. If like for a while I was trying to think about my work almost like as a form of ethnography, and like representing where I come from through like doing that as people have done before with anthropology in terms of representing a culture, but like figuring out what patterns represent my community. Like I can think of something that represents Greek pottery, right? But how do I represent the hood in pottery? And so some of the most iconic things that I could think of are all like references to patterns that I see over and over again on sneakers. And so I started to take like different generations of sneakers, like a Jordan 1, and like not literally cut it apart, but like cut all the sections apart on a piece of paper and like draw them out, and then reassemble this bowl with all the textures that you would find around the sneaker. And so that's how I created this form. This size of a bowl is traditionally used for something like a wine cooler. And so a lot of my forms that I call like this, I call them 40 coolers, because like we would drink more beer than we would like wine, right? And it was served out of this 40. And so, I'm always like looking for these like ways to also communicate. I think there's like a ignorance when it comes to the sophistication of my community and upbringing. You know, like if you think of something like a 40 ounce, you think, oh, that's lowbrow, right? But a bottle of wine is classy. Well, some bottles of wine are cheaper than some 40s, you know? So it's like really what's left is your, the cultural implications of you thinking that something's less valuable because of the people you associate with it. Um, and then also one time I gave a lecture and I brought all these bowls and I said, y'all, I want y'all to like serve, actually like use these. They were scared to use my bowls. I understand because of liability, but um, I was just thinking it'd be cool if like, people show up to this artist lecture and they're getting beer out of a 40 and they're getting out of these like handmade bowls, it's like the world that I want to see, it's like things that I want to see that I try to like put into action. Like a lot of times I'll give away my work. Like I remember one time my two uncles came from Puerto Rico and one of them, he gets $150 a month. He lives off $150 a month and he's on the top of this mountain in the middle of Puerto Rico. He has no idea how much my work is worth for nothing. So I take him to this gallery and I asked him to pick out something that he likes. And, he took home like a $10,000 bowl, but he don't know what it's worth. He probably uses it for like a cereal or something, but it's like, it's not about that. It's about like him being able to go to a place like a gallery and then not it being approachable for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really like, for me, a lot of the goal of the work.
Yeah, it's just like in so many ways you're commenting and subverting the idea of preciousness and how that gets assigned arbitrarily because in some ways it's all mud and dirt but then it's layered with gold and and yeah, historically I look at that and I'm seeing that's a rice bowl form and looking at cultures around the world and tea and exchange and then you're layering it with how a sneaker and the language of sneakers is around the world. And it's something you wear on your feet on the ground, touch the mud. Also, it's a collector's item that can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. I think it's all layered in there. Okay, clearly we could keep talking about these works, but I wanted to maybe ratchet up a little bit on your social justice commentary. So can we have the next slide, Connor? So can you tell us a little bit more? And now I'm seeing the themes of the the Worcester glazes dripping down onto the orange, the red and black neoclassical, which is something I'd never picked up on before. So I'm learning so much about your work in this presentation. But can you tell me more about this vase, one vase, front and back side?
Yeah, so the figure on the left, if you can't tell, is Colin Kaepernick. And the person on the right is, again, someone I've referred to as Queen, who's somebody who's an unidentified enslaved person. One of the things that I wanted to do with this piece is I kind of feel like, right now, maybe a little bit less so, but for a long time, Colin Kaepernick was this really divisive figure. It really changed a lot of things for me in terms of perspective, because I realized that like a lot of times people just figure out different wording to portray their like racist perspectives. And, Colin Kaepernick being a really talented quarterback, peacefully protesting. Mind you, I took a class in college on peaceful protests, and I see Gandhi and I see Mother Teresa, and I see all these people who are like really trying to like not physically fight people, but to like create change. And I saw that so much in him, and I said to myself, man, like it's crazy how people are so upset about a person of color kneeling. Like, how dare you? Like, how dare you take a stand? How dare you have an opinion? And, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like growing up and doing graffiti, because, when I would paint on a wall, I knew that it wasn't going to last. I knew that I would come back the next day and the city would cover it up. But I also knew that the city wasn't going to take away the trash on the street. I knew that wasn't going to provide more funding for education. So all their resources was spent on policing me and my family, and you know, that's why I turned to graffiti, because I didn't have any art classes. I didn't have any music classes. Like those things weren't offered where I came from. And so I started to think a little bit about how our activism, our role, our voices are really like the thing that people fear, that hate us, you know? Um, and Colin using, you know, his platform. I mean, before he did this, he wasn't necessarily the biggest, um, he wasn't necessarily the biggest star in the NFL. You know what I mean? It wasn't like Michael Jordan. You know, it was just like he was a big deal.
He was in a
But
Super Bowl. So
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. But like he, you know, at the same time, it's like he knew, he also knew that this was risky, right? And he did it anyway. And so there was just something really powerful about that. And then I also thought about this image and how I was reading some of the writing of the person who was the enslaver, and you know, one of the ads that they put out of one of their servants that went missing was was this person is tolerably black. That was one of the terms, and I just thought, like, imagine if that's what they're putting in a newspaper, what they say to people every day and how they treat them every day, you know. And you know, I was just thinking about like how we view this woman today, you know, and how we at least from my perspective, I hope that we respect you know, this person, and it can maybe remind us of a significant person in our lives, to really get a sense of like what we took away, and how somebody could be a divisive figure or an unloved figure, but then over time how that changes. Like you know, just during these last protests, you know, I noticed how the NFL and the NBA all started being apologetic and, you know, supporting like Black Lives Matter, you know. It was because of pressure. And so like even in this short period of time, we're already seeing things change, you know. And then some of those people who are hypercritical of Colin Kaepernick are now like, not, they're just like kind of more shut. They won't apologize or anything like that, but they say less things. And so for me, like Colin Kaepernick, is very risky. You know, some of the things I do, because whenever you're putting up a person, like, you don't know somebody you're honoring and putting in a museum, you don't know what they're going to do next month, you know. But like you know, for me, I have to, I feel like I have, as I get more and more of a platform, I feel like I need to take these opportunities and do something with it, even if it means that maybe I get some heat on my work, or, you know, people, I lose people who are interested in what I'm doing. But I think the message is far more important.
yeah, the long view of history. But we have, I think this is a kind of continuation, but we have one last example of your work before we return to the NOMA work. And this to me was always one of the most powerful statements in your work. So, and I don't want to jump too far with, I don't know how much what you want to share about this particular work, but I've heard you speak about it before, and brought me to tears. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit more
Sure.
about the crater.
Well, this piece is actually now, was one of the most proud things I've ever done. It's in the African American Heritage Museum, Culture and Heritage Museum in DC. Is part of the Smithsonian, and I was really blown away because I mean, there's all these moments as an artist where you connect visual things from your experience with what you're seeing in front of you. And after a while of doing that and being at school and realizing that most of the people I was in school with were white, and even the people of color like come from different places, so I felt really alone in how I would make certain associations and nobody else would get it, you know. Like when I started, like the first time that like I was able to recognize orange and black as being like Greek pottery or from that era, you know, I was also just like, does nobody else see that like this is black and orange, like prison jumpsuits, you know? And then you know, and also I'm from Philly, so it's black and orange, like the Flyers, and then, you know, you see these like images of war wrapped around these sort of like, forgive me, I'm not remembering the right word, but these strips of images that cover wars or stories of cultures past. And when I see that sort of like violence, you know, it just reminds me of like things I've seen in my life on the streets, you know. And so if I'm going to make a pot, you know, I can't really make it based off of the Greek experience. I don't really know what that was like, but I can make it based off of mine. And so a lot of times, like me just making something in the style of such and such, but relating it to the content that I've seen and that I've witnessed in my life, for some people it's jarring, but for me and for a lot of people of color, it's reality. You know what I mean? And so this piece, you know, it was it's funny because like I shouldn't say it's funny, but like one of the things that's interesting a lot of times is like with your artwork when you make something, a lot of times it seems really poignant 2, 3, 4, 5 years later. And it's unfortunate that sort of like the image of a police officer, you know, beating a black man is not something that like we feel like, oh, that was in the past, you know, like that was from the 60s. It's kind of like this piece looks like it was made yesterday, you know? And so it's one of those things where I think that one of the reasons why they wanted this piece is because of that. Is sort of timeless in a way. Like, unfortunately, you know, not just like the experience of Black Americans, but just like the plight of humanity, people trying to keep others down by physical violence and by any means, sort of the separation of classes. It reminds me of all those things, but you know, for real, like the main thing is like whenever I see orange and black, it kind of creates like a hole in my heart because I think about my brother and you know me being in school. Like while I was learning all this stuff, my brother was locked up. You know, and so it's kind of like that experience will never. Those two things can never separate themselves. Like whenever I make pottery, it's sort of like remembering that I'm free, and then remembering that other people like me that came from the same place as me are not free. And so it feels like an extra, I don't know if it's pressure or autonomy to like make work that reveres and references them and talks about their story, because it's kind of like if people like me don't do it, then it just doesn't get done, you know?
Um, well, I think you powerful place to maybe close up on looking at your work and switch gears and come back to Noma. And because all of those, I guess, poignant themes that we've seen in other work, like it's all here. That's one thing I've been so excited to get to engage with and work with this particular work, because you can talk about Louis Armstrong and Lil Wayne and records, but like the more time I spend with it, I see all of your work coming out of this garniture set, all of your themes of um, violence and destruction and healing and the past and the present kind of are all here. So I was kind of hoping that the conversation would flow this way. We started talking about stunting for New Orleans. We explored all of the themes that are in your work, and now kind of come back. And if anyone joining us tonight is kind of new to the work, maybe now you're looking at it and seeing some themes come out that you may not have noticed when you were first introduced to it. I'm going to step back a little bit because I haven't properly given the floor over to Nick. And Nick, I know you have a lot of really interesting things to say about this work. So, Nick, you wanna take over for
Yeah,
a little?
no, totally. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, obviously, but one that comes to mind, I think, is this idea of stunting, and obviously, you know, that's the title of the series, but just the idea of, you know, that being a way to express yourself in different communities, and you know, we think about, you know, the stunting in terms of Master P or Lil Wayne, whether it's chains or what you're wearing. But then I also think about stunting in terms of, you know, a contemporary art world context of collecting artwork, and this idea that the collection of artwork is still something that we as Black people, we as people of color have not done as much of, and in this moment in time, still our artwork is collected majority by white people. And so I'm interested, in your opinion, Roberto, how do you think your work or your practice combats that in working to increase how we see ourselves, in terms of art, how we appreciate it, and ultimately collect ourselves and preserve our cultures?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, Nick. I mean, I think honestly, a lot of these things happen over generations. And it's an unfortunate reality because I feel like in my generation, we had to like step foot in a college to begin with, and then when I first went to college, and I decided I was going to go for pottery, I found it I started going to college at 27 for pottery, and I'm 39 now, so it's been about 12 years. And when I started, I wanted to be a functional potter, and I wanted to make pottery that was really affordable, like cups with like graffiti on them and like images of people. And I had this idea, and then I got to school, and maybe like by my senior year I was already like in $80,000 of student debt, and by the time I graduated college with my master's, I was in $180,000 of student debt. And then I went to a craft fair, and I was trying to sell my cups for $10, and teapots for $25. I was doing it in Pittsburgh. After 3 days, I didn't sell anything. And I went home, and I thought to myself, man, like I got myself in all this debt, and I did something that I thought was like gonna have purpose and meaning and like bring pottery to the community where I come from. And one of the things that I realized is like I got to put myself in a position to be able to give back. Like I can't do it all. So I got to pick an avenue, and then like have in my heart that all of this is going to serve a purpose, and I'm going to do something to create more opportunities for Black and brown people to be able to pursue things like ceramics without getting in a lot of debt. Like that happens by having art in schools, because think about it, art schools, when they accept students, they give them scholarships based off of their portfolio. Well, who's got good portfolios? Kids who went to school with art, white kids, rich kids. So you basically continuing the history of giving white people opportunities by having it set up in this way. So what happens when somebody challenges that and says, look, that's not a good way to accept artwork. That's not a good way. What about the uniqueness of this person's story? What about the fact that you don't have this content in your institution? Challenging those things. And then the other thing that I do is that I also have work that, yes, I'll commission and have it in a museum. And then that also provides me with the resources. Like right now I have 6 employees and 3 separate studios, and I make at least 100 cups a month, and I keep my cups at about $100 each. And so I've had clients who've bought my work for a lot of money who are like, your cup should be like at least $2,000, and I'm just like, well, then who's gonna afford that? You know what I mean? So like my contract with my gallery, I have it where I'm allowed to sell my cups directly to people, and I can limit the price to what I think is affordable. The other facet to that is that I also I try not to advertise it too much, but I also give a lot of my artwork away. So I found so many people in the community, like other visual artists, and like every month I usually give at least 10 to 12 cups away, and usually 1 to 2 teapots away a month. And usually when I do that, it's a custom piece. Like this month, I made somebody a teaware set. Is a woman of color, and they and it's it's a lesbian couple who has children, and it's like I wanted to make them each their own personal cup. And then it's like I give that to them, and there's no questions asked. It's kind of like that's my opportunity to like put things in people's hands. And just like I said, when I go to the gallery with my uncle, I give them a piece. Like people think I'm crazy because they think about how much my work is worth and all that. But for me, it's kind of like No. Like I'm representing this culture, and this is part of my life, and so this is like I'm taking. You know what I mean? So this is my opportunity to give, and then other things like through the sale of my artwork, I created a scholarship at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts where um, uh, uh, a black, brown, indigenous student can go completely free to Haystack Mountain School of Crafts and have their travel paid for and their materials paid for. And that's actually the biggest scholarship that they have there, you know, and that costs like close to $50,000 that needed to be raised for that. So right now, the other thing that I'm trying to do is, I just like I think collecting is really important, but for me, I think that we create collectors when we create more artists, you know, because then like the visual arts become part of the larger context, and you know we have more people trying to be painters than like everybody just trying to be rappers or everybody just trying to be graffiti. You know what I mean? Like, things that they think are going to get them that notoriety or fame, and so I'm trying to do that through creating opportunities like my biggest I've had a couple ideas that have failed. Like I try to start an artist studio in Puerto Rico, and then Hurricane Maria came the next year. And right now, I thought to myself, what I want to do actually is I want to own a farm on the outskirts of Philly and make it a residency for Black and Brown people to go and actually have a gas kiln and be, you know what I mean, out in the country and make pots and like have chickens and have this different kind of experience where they're like actively like working directly with me and you know have this free time to make their work. And so right now that kind of feels like what's most in my heart and what I feel like I want to do, because I also want to be in community with people. Like I don't just when I meet people and my students, especially the people that I work with, I consider those people partners in my life. And anything that I can do, I do it for them. Like one of my students, he just got into the New Yorker for his photography, you know, and then two of my students this year that, you know, Design Miami is one of the biggest art fairs you can be in as an artist, period. And I have two graduate students, Black graduate students, who are showing their ceramic artwork in Design Miami this year, you know? And I'm starting to see more and more and more. And ceramics is not something that's really even shown in Design Miami. So you're talking about two Black people. First of all, they don't often show Black people. And then Black ceramic artists, and then graduate students at that. And so it's this thing that like me being in these places lets me like, you know, tug on a curator like, Mel, you know, you got to check out Nick's work because Nick's blowing up right now, you know? Like, yeah, I got the entryway, but often I'm trying to use that to create opportunities for other people.
Yeah, no, I think what sticks out to me about that is just the idea, like music versus contemporary visual art. Like music is just naturally a more communal experience. Like the idea that like, you know, we can be in conversation right now and I could spit a Wayne lyric and we could go back and forth, I'm sure, for bars, or even just going to a concert. And it's like, you know, it's communal. You know, you're sharing space with people. And as opposed to, I think, contemporary art and contemporary art spaces, they're a little more rigid, more stale, more singular to like one person and viewer. But I think in this piece, you obviously are combining the visual art with the music history. And I guess I'm also curious about, you know, what you think the relationship between music and visual art is, particularly in a city like New Orleans, or just, you know, culturally rich Black cities in general.
Well, I mean, for me, music plays a huge role because I actually like when I'm working on pieces like this, I am actually like usually listening to the artist, if it's a musician, or you know, like for example, like when I paint in Martin Luther King in the past, I kind of just have like some speeches playing in the background, you know, and it activates the space, but it makes me feel like I'm performing in my own studio, and it makes it feel like I'm in a relationship with that person, and you know I think a little bit about what they would want. You know what I mean on a work of art that represents them. But I often feel that same thing, and partly like usually when I give a lecture, I'm like I usually integrate like hip hop into it and spoken word. And I kind of like what I love doing with that, Nick, is especially in places where people are not expecting it. You know, if you hit them with something hard to begin the lecture, everybody's like, shit, I didn't know what I was coming to tonight, you know? And like, I want that because, um, you know, it like wakes people up, and it also makes them feel like they're experiencing something, which I feel often is like something that is just like you so beautifully articulated, is lost in a visual art experience. But one of the things that I feel like is really an opportunity for people like me is like functional things, you know, like the fact that you could hold you know, a mug that I make and you know, use it and drink out of it in conversation with somebody else, I feel like is experiential. It's just a different experience, you know. Like sometimes I like to be in a room with the loudest music possible, and sometimes I like to be completely by myself with nobody around and just some incense playing and me doing something that's not that important, you know. And so just like there's a sound for everything, I feel like that's how music affects me. I mean, for a long time, I was just listening to Kendrick Lamar like on repeat. I think it's like 2017, and I never once drew or painted Kendrick Lamar, you know, during that time. But it was just kind of like I was living in Vermont, and it was like I felt like somebody was speaking like a different language that I understood, and it was like really remarkable for me. And so I wanted that to play to sort of like offset the fact that I was like in the middle of nowhere and didn't have any other people around me that were black and brown. It was hard, you know, but music made me feel like those people were there.
Totally. Yeah. Do we want to check out the chat?
Yeah, let's see. Oh, yeah, 6:45. So we want to make sure any of the participants here tonight, if you've been sitting on a question, throw it into the chat with a Q&A. We can see those, you know, to make sure that we can hear what you're thinking. And let's see, I know, well, one kind of question we've had come through, which is something, you know, I had to look up, like, I didn't know kind of the New Orleans music history. I knew Lil Wayne, I knew Louis Armstrong. I didn't know much about No Limit Records. So when we started this commission, you know, I was you know, Googling to get this information. Um, and that's been kind of an interesting, I think something I wanted to cover a little bit tonight was, I guess, hearing directly from you while we have you here, Roberto, to tell us a little bit more about like Lil Wayne in your musical experience, or Louis Armstrong, or did you get to know both of these figures better through this work, or, you know, just to maybe share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things that I would use to describe all three of the people that are represented here is there are people who are distinctly New Orleans, you know, in terms of like style and cadence and distinctiveness. Like there's no confusing not only like Lil Wayne's voice, but the style of music that he's doing, and sort of like this. It's like it's strange because somehow he like allows you to himself to exist as like a skater kid slash you know, somebody you don't want to mess with, you know, slash like show off, you know. He's kind of like this really eclectic mix of all these things. But what's really interesting is like when you hear his voice, like that can't come from anywhere else, you know. And I feel like the sound of No Limit and the sound of Louis Armstrong, I feel like all those things are like specific to that place that I couldn't imagine coming from anywhere else. So much so that they become kind of like part of like my um like if I hear a sound like that, then I immediately think of New Orleans, you know. So that's kind of like what I was going for. The other thing, one of the reasons why I selected No Limit is because No Limit, you know, for me, as I was talking with like Nick, And Mel, a little bit earlier, just in passing, Master P was really a true entrepreneur, and multifaceted. He got people thinking about, hey, why don't I get my money? Why don't I make my money work for me? Like, why don't I make films too? Why do I have to just stick with rapping and like get royalties from that? So he started working on like cell phones and beepers, and you know what I mean, like clothing, just like everything. And then you see that blossom from so many different people, like a 50 Cent buying vitamin water and selling it for $100 million. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff came from Master P being like, I'm gonna like take what I got right now and hustle, but also the gaudiness, like when I think of if you ever see Master P's cribs on MTV, that's one of the most iconic images that not only sticks out for me, but for a lot of people when they think about cribs. Because when you went in Master P's house, he was like also giving you the illusion that he was even wealthier than he really was, and he was wealthy, So like when you go into his house, he had this like domed interior space and he had it covered in gold leaf. But when you come in, he's like, yo, my whole ceiling is gold, and you're just like, damn, And so for me, growing up as a kid, I was like, Master P's house is made out of gold, So like when I think of him, I think of gold, So it's like if I'm in New Orleans, how could I not make reference to that? Because that was a very, very early representation that to be where I'm from doesn't mean that you are stuck being impoverished the rest of your life. You know what I mean? Like maybe I didn't want to like have these big gold chains and all that stuff, but I wanted to be able to like, eat out once in a while if I wanted. It was kind of like this thing where it made me feel like I had opportunities, even though it was done in this sort of like really gaudy way.
Yeah, I think too, it's like in addition to entrepreneurship that sticks out like with that, it's like this idea of like improvisation, like jazz music is obviously, it comes from New Orleans, without Congo Square, I think you obviously don't get jazz music. And I think, it just it's evolving. Like I think Lil Wayne and the way he freestyles, that's just, a different type of jazz music, a different type of improvisation, just like catching a flow and just really just going in. And Lil Wayne was the best at that, for damn near a decade, So I think that's what I think the relationship between Louis and Lil Wayne, I think that's what sticks out to me too.
Yeah, it's like I don't know how else to describe it other than like a funk, It's like a little extra, Um, and I can't quite put my finger on it. It's like also really effortless. That's the other thing that I feel like when I hear, Louis Armstrong, it's just kind of like this is inside of him. You know what I mean? Like this is instinct, and I kind of feel like that about the way that Lil Wayne talks and goes through music because obviously it's very different. Like Louis Armstrong and Lil Wayne, very different. They're very skilled in different ways. But the thing that I feel like he grew up in that music scene and like witnessed everything around him and said, all right, I'm gonna take a little bit of Birdman, I'm gonna take a little bit of this, I'm gonna take a little bit of that. And also I'm me, so I'm gonna add that to it. And it's just kind of like any, for lack of a better word, prodigy, like we're used to very tangible ways of seeing that. Like for example, a child who can play Bach on computer, on the piano or whatever, like a kid that can play Mozart. But, if a child is sort of like extraordinary as a lyricist or their instinct understanding of music, and they just so happen to be Black, it's not seen in that way. You know what I mean? It's seen as like, look at this thug rather than like, look at this genius, And so it's, yeah, that's kind of what it reminds me of. I think somebody else asked a question about the pedestals. If you want me to quickly get into that. So the pedestals, the colorful part is all made out of ceramic. And so the history behind that is actually there's this connection between ancient Greece and graffiti. So in ancient Greece, we have this term called sgraffito, which means to scratch through. So like back in the day, you'd have these walls in Greece where people would be like, hey, yo, Nick, I'm gonna be over at the Pantheon at 4 o'clock. Let's go over there and hang out for a little bit. And then somebody will find it, and then they'd be like, all right, Nick, I'll see you. You know, all right, Rob, that's cool. And they'll meet each other at 4 o'clock. So that's the way they did it. And so for me, graffiti is very similar in how like you layer drawings over and over again, and it gets covered up. And when you scratch through it, you have all these layers in it. And so this is like pieces of ceramic that I threw as tubes. And then probably over like a 6-month period, I would paint on them every day. And then after that period, I scratched through them to show all the layers. And I kind of want to represent sort of like the idea of ruins, but how like, I feel like these figures are example of people who like take ruins and make them into these beautiful things, you know? And I didn't want to just like have my work sit on a traditional pedestal. I wanted like this like ancient ruin, beautiful thing to like hold up a very like put together sort of like regal work. And so that's sort of where that comes from.
Wow. My mind is blown. I didn't know about the building it up over the 6 months and scratching it away. I have my own personal meaning that I found out of these columns. And you know,
I'd love
it's
to hear
poetic
it.
in its own way, but it's kind of total. Well, I mean, oh, well, okay. I mean, for me, it kind of comes directly out of 2020, and working in a cultural institution this year has been challenging. That's an understatement, but we really kind of thinking through the white centric history that I'm part of. And me looking at the facade of our building has neoclassical columns like so many cultural institutions. And then I look at this work, and it's, you know, it's the weight of history crumbling these columns, but they're still standing. So I ultimately, I'm an optimist, so I always come back around. So I'm looking at this and I'm seeing, you know, having to question history and question these supposedly white columns with like the true maybe color that's holding them up. And then I get into the kintsugi. So I'm always looking for your ceramic references. That's what I do as a ceramic historian. So kind of digging into that, the idea of the Japanese kintsugi tradition, where like if a teapot breaks, that's part of its life journey, and it's going to come back together and be celebrated, have those wounds be celebrated with gold highlighting those repairs, which I assume is part of the reason that all of the cracks in your columns have the gold.
Yeah, it is. And if anybody asks, I mean, I swear to you, the cracks are on purpose. I mean, you know it because the only way to apply gold is if it has glaze in it, glaze on it. So the columns themselves are not glazed; they're not shiny if you look at them, but those interior crack spaces are shiny, so that I can paint gold on them and it sticks. So that's actually like real gold. It's called gold luster, and it's a liquefied form of gold, and it's about 10% real gold. So it's shiny on purpose for sure.
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm just struck with like, well, with all great artwork, yours is right up there. Like everyone that really spends time with it starts to see not only what the artist may have been thinking, but like what they personally could interpret and feel from the artwork as well. And that's what I've had with this.
You know, it's really interesting now because I'm not sure where this comes from, but I think it's part of being a person of color, which is like I have a real deep sense of imposter syndrome. You know, like when I meet you and somebody's excited, like I look at Nick and I'm like I'm excited to meet Nick, and Nick's like I'm excited to meet you, and I'm just like what, you know, like how could anybody be excited to meet? Like, you know, then I even look at these things and you know, I look at this stuff and even though I am the artist, I feel like completely separated because I almost like when I like it, it's almost kind of like, well, since I like it, I couldn't have made it, you know, like that has to be from something else. And so is a strange, I think it's sort of like a perverted version of humbleness, you know, which is like I cannot I don't have the capacity to be cocky, you know. I'm constantly in survival mode, and my anxiety as an artist, you know, I kind of feel like what I think a lot of musicians probably feel like is like maybe people are only going to listen to me for a couple years, you know. So while I got those couple years, I'm going to really hustle and put it out there. But it's hard to like reflect and think because like sometimes people say, "Oh, Rob, you're talented," and I'm like, none of this is talent. You know what I mean? Like it was all hard work, to be honest. Like when I was in school, college, everybody knew how to draw. Everybody had like art classes behind them. I didn't have none of that. You know what I mean? All I had was drive. And so I would just stick with it. And, you know, after a while, getting criticism after criticism after criticism, I just kind of felt like I gotta close my eyes and just keep going and making what I'm making. But it's never felt like accomplished. You know what I mean? It's always felt like it's work that's in conversation with the place that it finds itself in, and the work isn't really there unless people are interacting with it. You know, I kind of feel like the fact that people that I don't know look at the piece and find connections to the piece. I feel like that's far more important than my notoriety. Like I almost feel like if I could do all the things that I do and like take my name out of it, but it kind of being like, nah, this is from you know, the hood. You know what I mean? Like this is hood pottery, you know, and that's what that is. I'm from this movement, you know. Um just because I feel like this isn't just me, you know, like the things I'm making is because of Lil Wayne, it's because of Louis Armstrong, it's because of No Limit, it's because of New Orleans. So I can't take credit for that. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm making something inspired by what you gave me versus like this is what I made. So I'm just really thankful that a museum even gave me an opportunity to make this work, you know. But also um, it doesn't mean anything unless people are related to it and connect with it, and that's what I get excited about, you know.
Um,
I kind of feel like it's a book report, you know what I mean? Like you could like my book report and everything, but I mean it's not my book report that you like, it's the story, you know. Like if I remember one of my book reports when I was real young was on Harriet Tubman. And I just remember hearing all this stuff. In my mind, I was like, man, she's hard. She just like went through everything and just like didn't take no names. But it was like at the end of the day, I wasn't like, you know, look at all the stuff I did. I was like, look at the stuff Harriet Tubman did, you know. And that's kind of like how I feel about the work. Even though I'm the creator and get to put these things together, I just really get influenced and excited about the communities that I get to work with.
that- that's funny. If you feel that way as an artist, imagine how a curator must feel, because I don't do anything except say, that guy has interesting ideas. This is interesting work. And yeah, you're not actually, yeah, it's your whole role is to find the interesting story and have a
See,
small part in telling it.
I think that's huge. I think that's huge. I mean, Nick, you work curatorially too, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, no. First, I just appreciate that honesty. You know, speaking of yourself, you know, as the artist, like the imposter syndrome, because yeah, I think it's something that we all experience at different levels. And I think curatorially, you know, obviously, like I had to think about both sides. Like I think about my position as an art maker, but also as the producer. You know, the person who is you know, a lot of times in between artists and an institution like NOMA, and how you're shifting the institution to better serve. Because I think traditionally, I mean, this entire industry, like the art industry, is built upon valuing an object more than a person. Like I've been thinking about recently how, you know, the irony of that, you know, in this moment, as Black people, we're still petitioning for value for our lives, but the art that we make is going off the shelf. It's the hot stuff right now. But like the idea that as an artist, as a Black artist, you can create something that's technically worth more value than your own life, which is bonkers. And so I think as an artist and a curator, it's like constantly thinking about that dichotomy is something that's on my mind a lot.
Well, if I could just quickly say, because I know that we only got a certain amount of time. I think the role of the curator is critical, and especially Nick, with what you're doing. I think it's really critical because it's like it's the difference between real quickly, that same story I told you about making $60 after 3 days. Maybe a couple months later, the gallery work that I work with now said, "Hey, we would like to show your work in New York." And I told them, I showed them my work. I was really nervous. I thought it was more of like a craft store. And they said, they called me and said, "We sold your teapot for $2,000. I said, "What? $2,000? And I sent them all my teapots, and they saw all my teapots, right? And so the difference is a curator, you seeing what I'm doing and like being, tapping me on the shoulder at that flea market and going, "Rob, this don't belong here. This belongs over here. And we want to sell it for enough money for you to keep making more of them, And without that, it's just like we don't have, sometimes we don't even have the direction. We don't have the sense of community. We don't even know the value in our own work. So, really, the curator plays a pivotal role in like reminding us that what we're doing is effective and what we're doing is worthy of being done, because otherwise I would still be in flea markets probably with a lot of pots, and nobody caring.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I don't want to wrap up this conversation, but actually kind of end this in a very maybe poetic way, because I can assure you, Roberto, in ways that we've talked about tonight and ways that we haven't talked about publicly, this work has had an impact at NOMA, the staff, their docents, administration, public. It's had a lot of conversations, and I'm just so honored that we get to have a piece of your work here in New Orleans. Hopefully it sparks more, so you continue to have more of an engagement in this city, because that might be a nice place to tie up like something missing from 2020, and even this conversation. We haven't maybe gotten to share as much about your community involvement, your mural work, your teaching work, because that was always a goal of mine for 2020 before times, to try to have NOMA and the New Orleans community be part of that practice. So
well, maybe y'all invite me. I'm counting down the days so I can go to New Orleans. I mean, I keep hearing about this food. My wife from the South, she keeps telling me about this food, and I just want to go there. I want to make pots with people. I want to talk to people. I want to be in community, see how I could, be helpful in any way, try to lift up other voices. So please invite me back and I'll come running for sure.
2021.
Yeah, we got
you. So Nick, do you have anything you want to wrap up with before we kind of thank everyone for coming tonight?
Nah, I mean, I just want to, echo the thanks. Thank you for this work. Thank you for all the work you do. Thank you, just for being an inspiration. I think to not just me, I think to anybody on this call. This has been amazing. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so for the 37 participants we still have on tonight, thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. Thank you for your support of NOMA through attending programs like this. Thanks, Nick, for joining me tonight and helping me with music knowledge and and your graciousness and great conversation skills. But mostly, Roberto, thank you for all the work that you do and for being here tonight to share some insight into stunting for New Orleans, which we are so lucky to have as part of our permanent collection at NOMA. So with that, thank you all. So enjoy the rest of your last few weeks as we bid adieu to 2020.
All right, same here. Thank you.
Yeah, see ya.
Night, everyone.
Bye.